Welcome everyone! We are at the end of our discussion of Christopher Booker's 7 basic plots, and we have definitely not left the best for last. Today we're going to be talking about the Rebirth storyline, one that I hesitate to call a basic plot, but Christopher Booker does, so we're going to be explaining how it works anyways. The Rebirth storyline involves a main character who is overcome by the dark forces in their story, but is eventually saved and reborn, whether literally or figuratively, and allowed to reach a happy ending. And in this Rebirth state, they give what for to the dark forces. The most important aspect of these stories are the evil forces themselves that have defeated the main character and that have to be overcome in order to save them. Most of the storyline is in overcoming these dark forces, and if this is sounding a little bit like the overcoming the monster plotline, that's because it kind of sort of is. But we'll get to that later. There are two main types of Rebirth storylines, and they can be distinguished by the nature of the evil forces involved and how they interact with the main character. In the first case, the main character has an extraordinary flaw that comes to dominate their daily life and affect them in a negative way, such as the Grinch, or Scrooge McDuck. I mean, Scrooge. Can't believe I had to look up Scrooge's first name. Too much DuckTales. Such as Ebenezer Scrooge's extraordinary greed in A Christmas Carol, or the Grinch's jealousy of the Whovians living and celebrating Christmas. The beginning of these stories is very much like the end of a tragedy, where a main character is making decisions that will inevitably lead to a bad outcome. And like the end of a tragedy, the bad stuff does happen, and it happens because of the choices the protagonists have made. The Grinch steals all of the presents in Whoville. Ebenezer Scrooge continues to be an old miser who refuses to share his wealth with anyone. However, unlike a tragic storyline, the protagonists are allowed to understand the depths of their mistakes. Someone or something intervenes to show them why what they've been doing has been wrong up to this point. In Scrooge's case, it's being visited by 3 ghosts that shows him the ramifications of his actions. In the Grinch's case, he sees the Whovians unite and celebrate Christmas despite all the presents being gone, and becomes to understand the true meaning of Christmas. This revelation gives the protagonists an understanding of the depths of their actions and allows them to undo the damage that they've done or make up for it in some way. And so the main character is able to overcome these flaws and become a more whole and good person. In the second case, the evil forces in the story do not come from the main character, rather they come from a witch or something. It's an explicitly evil character or natural forces that create a bad situation that has negatively impacted the main character. These stories operate very similarly to a comedy plotline. One could say it is a comedy plotline, in which bad stuff happens right out of the gate, and the remainder of the story is meant trying to overcome and reverse the damage of that bad stuff. The main character is overcome by these evil forces and either imprisoned or sent into eternal slumber or killed, and it becomes the duty of a second main character to overcome the evil forces and both save the original main character and defeat the evil forces. These storylines exist almost exclusively in the realm of fairy tales and mythology, or even children's stories. Sleeping Beauty being the archetypal example, but it even appears to a certain extent in stories like The Ugly Duckling or Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So as you probably gathered by the way I described these, the Rebirth storyline is not exactly a basic plot in that it has no unique characteristics. It's better understood in one of two ways, either as a tragedy that leads to the main character's redemption rather to their defeat, or as a comedy where the bad stuff is really, really bad, but the main characters are able to overcome it anyways. Character rebirths are such a common story element that are used in such a formulaic way that considering them a plotline doesn't really do justice to the way that they operate in both classical and modern storytelling. The idea of a land being under a curse that is lifted at the end for everyone's celebration, or the idea of a character being killed only to be revived by divine intervention or the source of a magical item. These are extremely common ending tropes that function regardless of the story that preceded them. They're a way to introduce death to young audiences without the shock of having it being permanent. It's a way to introduce themes of forgiveness as a result of personal sacrifice. The Rebirth story arc is a tool that writers can use to cement a theme. They don't require a specific plot structure in order for them to operate. They're versatile enough to be used in almost any form of storytelling that you can imagine. And this is why, even in the examples given by Christopher Booker, the plotlines are essentially comedies or essentially tragedies, wherein someone dies in the former or someone is revived in the latter. So that, in a nutshell, is my take on the Rebirth basic plot and of the 7 basic plots as a whole. And as I mentioned at the beginning, these are basic plots, which is why I wasn't able to pull many examples from modern literature, because as a whole, modern literature does not rely on these basic plots in order to tell stories. Especially since the advent of postmodernism, books and plays have become so much more complex in the way that they tell stories and how they weave plots together, at the same time that they've become a lot more simple in scope and have been able to tell stories that don't have a plot at all, or at least ones that aren't recognizable by any of these metrics. The most common example is Samuel Beckett's Silence Waiting for Godot, a play which by all intents and purposes has absolutely no plot, but still tells a story. I have, however, been able to describe movies as following these basic plots. This is because of some very complex factors that have led to Hollywood movies simplifying their plots and relying on more archetypal and basic forms of storytelling. These reasons, however, are ones that I don't have time to get into today, but will address in a later episode. So that's it. We finished our discussion of the 7 basic plots. The fundamental tools in the way that we develop and tell stories, but they are simple by design and can't be relied upon to carry a story the whole way. Unless you're making a movie, but we'll talk about that later. But there's good news for you. Next week is the Writers Guild of Alberta's Young Writers Week, and as a result, I will be releasing one video every day, weekday. Every weekday. I'm not doing it for Saturday and Sunday. Ooh. One video every weekday about a completely new subject. Non-standard storytelling medium. I'll be talking about new media, ones that have been enabled by technology that have allowed us to tell stories in ways that hadn't been possible thousands of years ago. It'll be great. You should check it out. Also, clear your schedules for Saturday, March 18th between noon and 4 p.m. for we'll be hosting an Ask an Author panel discussion hosted through our Facebook group. For more details, check out details below. Also, probably put some right here. It'll be great. And that's all for today. So until next week, keep on writing. Rather write through the weekend because the next video is Monday and weekends vanish very quickly. The Rebirth. I will be glad not having to deal with this. So much sexist shit. So much. Like, it kind of ruins a lot of his arguments that he's so adamant about gender roles. Like, so adamant. Like, 90% of his analysis is only possible because gender roles. Don't do that. Like, please don't do that. Ever. In your anything.